Last week we marked the discovery of the one who was born as God in the midst of humanity at the Epiphany. And today we hear two stories that are along the same theme of discovery and recognition. And the theme of recognition in Christianity is a through line for every single generation. If, as we say, God continues to be among us, then it matters whether or not we recognize that presence. For many, there seems to be no evidence of God's presence among us. And so the question or the conclusion that many come to is, well, God just must not be here. Maybe God has invented a made-up human construct. Christians would say, the better question is, how is it that we do or do not recognize the presence of God among us? Because the lack of recognition for all practical purposes is no different from the very absence of God itself. So it matters how we go about recognizing God's presence. It matters when we hear stories about people who say that they have heard the voice of God speaking to them, when we are making our best efforts to hear that same voice. It matters when we hear other stories of people who said, I have followed God's calling in my life. And we say to ourselves, I'm not even sure I have a calling. What would such a calling sound like or look like or be like? Maybe I would like a calling, but I don't know if I've ever received one. So for every story in which there are individuals in the generations of the faithful who have known relationship with God, there needed to be a recognition that this was in fact God interacting with them in their lives. In the very first story, I think it is comforting that it takes one whose specific vocation, whose specific situation in life was to recognize the presence of God. It takes him 3 times to do so. So Samuel, from the very earliest age, had been given over to be raised under religious tutelage by a mentor. And so his job, his formation, was to become attuned, attenuated to the presence of God. And on one particular night, he hears a voice calling out his name, and he's a little perplexed. It doesn't sound like the voice of his mentor, but then again, who else could it be? And so he just kind of brushes it off, like you may have in your life. I can say that I certainly have in my life. Okay, yeah, whatever, that's weird, but I'm going on with my stuff. And then it happens again. And, maybe you clue in a little bit more. Second time it happens, you go, maybe I should pay attention to this a little bit more. Samuel does, but he can't figure it out. Goes back to sleep. Then the third time it happens, he comes to his mentor, and it's the mentor that figures it out and says, go back and say, here I am, God. And that's what Samuel does. And between the two of them and 3 efforts of God to speak and to give Samuel some insight into what is to come in the tradition of the prophets, they finally recognize that God is speaking. Now, it's noteworthy, I think, to also recognize what happens after God speaks to Samuel and tells him some pretty negative things about his mentor, that Samuel's afraid. And so he goes back to Eli, and Eli says, what did he tell you? And Samuel's thinking, you're not going to want to hear this, because it wasn't complimentary towards you. And Eli says, tell me what it was. And Eli and Samuel does, at great risk, at great trepidation. It's hard to tell your teacher or your mentor or your boss something that you think that they don't want to hear, oftentimes there's a negative reaction to that. And the reaction is, it is the Lord, let him do what seems good to him. There is both a recognition and there's a trust. And even if it's not complimentary, even if it's not uplifting, even if it's not what was hoped or prayed for, the recognition is something authentic has just happened, and we need to pay attention to that. This is a powerful story, a powerful example of both God's persistence and also human capacity over time and multiple encounters with God to recognize the voice of God in their lives. There's a joke among those who sense that they might be called to ordained ministry and enter an ordained ministry track because there's a psychological evaluation that all candidates towards ordination go through. And the joke is, one of the questions they will ask you is, do you hear voices? And the correct answer is no. But you got to understand who's asking the question. They're not asking you about your prayer life. They're a trained psychotherapist, and they're asking you about different kinds of voices. But it's a fine line. And over the course of human history and expression of encounters with God, there has been suspicion about just exactly what kind of voice is speaking. And what is that voice saying and telling one? And discernment, recognition becomes all the more important. Are the things that we are hearing from the voice that we wonder might be God, are those consistent with the character of God? Are those consistent with the ways in which God calls us to love our neighbor as ourselves? Are they consistent with God calling us to serve the vulnerable, to serve the outcast and the stranger, to offer hospitality to the visitor? Are they consistent with the other things that in the bigger frame we have received as guides to recognize God's presence on our own path? So that leads us to the gospel narrative. There are these individuals right in the beginning of the Gospel of John whom Jesus encounters. And again, he has this extraordinary encounter with two people particularly. He meets one person named Philip and he just says, "Follow me." Now, I gotta believe there's more to this story, but it is striking, even if so, that Jesus encounters someone, says, "Follow me," and that immediately there's recognition. I have to say, I'm a little jealous. How wonderful would it be to have the confidence and the assurance encountering the presence of God in your life, to hear or to see something, and just to know that is God. I'm in a good place. I'm going to go with this person. And that seems to have been Philip's experience. It is not many of ours experience. There's often more wonderment. It's more like Samuel. Who are you? Is this indigestion from my dinner last night? What is going on? Not for Philip. Follow me. And not only that, he goes to someone else and says, look, this extraordinary person is the fulfillment of our hopes and expectations. If you had been long looking forward to God intervening in human history in a particular way, and then you believe that you are in the place in which it's happening and you see it, how blessed are you? Reminds us of Mary's response to the Annunciation. Here I am, let it be with me as you have said. And Eli's confirmation, it is the Lord, let him do what seems good to him. There is this common theme after recognition of trust. If this is of God, then only good can come of it. Even if it's hard, only good can come of it, because God is not going to lead me into a place where I will be vulnerable or in danger. So Philip goes to Nathanael and says, we have found the one that was foretold in the prophets. And I love Nathanael's response. Apparently, Nazareth was kind of a backwater, not the place where all the fashionable young hip people were moving for culture and trendiness and other kind of stuff. Because Nathanael says, really? Nazareth? I kind of doubt it. Have you been to Nazareth recently? Yeah. Doesn't get good reviews on Yelp. Can anything good come out of Nazareth? And instead of entering into a debate, Philip has this brilliance of saying, just come and see. I'm not going to convince you of this, but I have come to recognize something that is profound, and I want you to have the opportunity to recognize it as well. See what you think. When I have the privilege of meeting individuals who come to visit the church for the first time, I love to get to know them a little bit and ask them just a few questions about their story. But instead of giving them a sales pitch about the church, well, let me tell you about our programs, and let me tell you about this and that, and here's why this should be the church for you. Instead, what I'm more inclined to say is, it's important for you to be attentive to whether you have sensed the presence of God in what you have experienced here. And if you have, great. Let's keep talking. Let's keep spending time together. If you haven't, go explore other places. Not because I'm trying to kick you out or be unwelcoming, but the point is not me to give you a good sales pitch or a marketing pitch in order to entice you to be a part of my church. The point is that we connect with and encounter the authentic presence of God, and that's what's most important. That's what you need to have recognition of. And so Philip knows that, and he says, come and see. And then Jesus does this wonderful thing about saying something about Nathanael's character that would just be impossible to know about a stranger that you haven't met before. And Nathanael's astounded. And then Jesus builds upon that. Are you impressed by this? Well, okay. But you're going to be impressed by even more things after this if we have the opportunity to journey together. And at that point, Nathanael has a recognition that only could have come from his direct experience of the presence of Jesus. Not from a sales pitch from Philip or any other kinds of religious marketing, but a direct encounter and a recognition that God is here, and I have had an interaction with the presence of God. That is our opportunity and our invitation, particularly in the season of Epiphany. Epiphany, discovery, enlightenment, an aha light bulb moment, having an epiphany, similar to what Samuel and Eli had, similar to what Philip and Nathanael had, probing and searching and reaching and allowing our spirits and our imaginations and our intellect and our heart to reach out into the limitlessness of God's presence and to resonate with some aspect of God speaking to us or embracing us or strengthening us or giving us peace. I hope that you have a story like that in your own faith journey. Because when we have had one, then we can look back on it and go, yeah, I know that I have encountered God at that one time, and I will encounter God again. And John's story is not Charity's story, is not Marianne's story, cannot be my story. But if each of us have a story, and then we share those stories with others, they become like this gathering momentum, this rolling momentum of a faith journey that strengthens and encourages one another. This morning we have heard 2 biblical stories. We find ourselves now in a multiple week season that is intended for us to be spiritually attuned and attenuated to our own story in relationship with God. In these days and weeks to come of this season of Epiphany, may your prayers, may your expressions of gratitude, may your interactions with those whom God brings across your path be opportunities for you to hear and to see God moving in your life and in the world around you. And may Epiphany for you not just be a churchy word around a liturgical season, but may it be a new and restorative experience of God in your life this year. Amen.